Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. And on this global show, I'm honored to be the host where we greet people from the United States and all over the world, almost every country, to talk about global affairs, innovation, turbulence politically, economically, and the post-COVID world we live in today, where nothing seems normal anymore, at least the way it used to be. I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the United States. And today, as I begin the show, just a couple of things before we bring in some guests. Yesterday, the Supreme Court heard arguments about the Student Loan Relief Program. The central question is whether President Biden has the authority to cancel up to $20,000 in federal student loans for tens of millions of Americans. It does look as that the conservatives of the court, no surprise here, believe are skeptical, and they think that Congress should be involved when dealing with such large amounts of money. So what's next? The Supreme Court will be rendering a decision sometime this summer. We pray for Greece as the tragedy occurred, another train collision. 36 people died in northern Greece as a train collided with a freight train, and they crashed into each other, and 85 people were injured, but 36 have died. The collision was en route between two popular tourist cities, Athens and Thessaloniki. A surprise defeat for Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, the first gay and lesbian mayor of Chicago, who lost in the midst of tremendous gun violence going on in Chicago. And now Paul Vallas, the former chief executive of Chicago Schools, will be going against Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson to be the mayor of Chicago. And a winner was declared in Nigeria's election. Bola Ahmed Tinubu from the country's ruling party announced this morning emerged as a victor despite unpopularity of outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari. So we're going to get the reaction from some Nigerian analysts later in this week, but it's pretty interesting. Nigeria is doing a lot of really great things in terms of their democracy and trying to make changes. And finally, if you need a passport this summer, get your application in ASAP. Wait times have been really creeping up. It's taking up to 8 to 11 weeks for our routine applications. Make sure you get it in. And we're going to be talking about AI and Microsoft and Bing and Chatbot. It just looks like all the major players are now what I call crossing the chasm and getting into AI, with Microsoft now adding it into their search engine, Bing. So another entrant into AI. So that's all I have for today. I'm going to give my commentary at the end in terms of just insight, but I want to go ahead and welcome Mark Lee and our panelists and guests. Thank you, Mark.
No problem. Like I said, it's just me, you, and Nick right now. We'll see if anybody else shows up among our illustrious panel and other folks as well that have been invited, but we'll see if they show up. Nick and Steve, I do have to take a moment of personal pride and personal congratulations, because yesterday, after the defeat of Butler, my Marquette Golden Eagles, they were the Warriors when I was there, became the Big East champions. So they are the Big East regular season champions, and I am very proud to see that. They haven't had a ranking of number 6 since before I was in school and before their national championship. I think that is the highest ranking they've had since 1976. So that was a long time ago. And Nick, you'll enjoy this. They were picked actually number 9 out of the 11 teams in the conference, and Tyler Kolek, their guard, actually had a attitude when he was told that. He was basically, using explicitives, basically that said, F them, I'll just use that word, and everything when told about that ranking. So sometimes if you gather as a team and you have determination, you can overcome a lot of your enemies. I'm sure that you even see that, Steve, in politics and everything. So they went in with an attitude, maybe a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and they came out as the national champions because they were going to be determined to have that record. So they've only got one more game in the regular season, and then they were going to the Big East tournament, and they are definitely heading to the NCAA, possibly being as high as a seed as either a number 3 or a number 2. So we'll see how they do in the tournament, but definitely wanted to take a moment of personal pride to say that a team, alma mater that I went to, Marquette, and their basketball team, which I have been following for years, actually even follow some of our alumni like Jimmy Butler and definitely Jay Crowder, and even more historically when I was in school, Doc Rivers, who is the coach of the Philadelphia 76ers. So I do follow some of our alumni as well that have gone on to the NBA, as well as the team itself. And I've been doing that ever since I graduated in the mid 80s. So like I said, just want to take that moment of personal pride to shout out my alma mater, Marquette, and the fact that they are the Big East champions.
Hey, Mark, the value of your degree just went up, by the way. They did a study on if your team wins a national championship or does well in sports, more applicants actually come into the university and drives up the value of your degree. So congratulations, your Marquette degree just went up in value. How you monetize off that, I've yet to figure out, but it is what it is out in XYZ land.
Congratulations on that. Real quickly, the greatest part of the shows I get to set the table. So, Supreme Court, what do you think, guys?
Biden versus Nebraska. All of a sudden, the student loans gone. I think he's overstepped his powers, and I think the Supreme Court is going to kick that thing back downstairs. So I don't think you're going to get those loan reliefs.
You say he's overstepped his boundaries, but even Amy Coney Barrett, who is a leading conservative, is questioning whether a group of GOP-led states has standing to block his student debt relief. So we do know that the court's 3 liberal
standing
justices.
is always an issue. The Article 3 issue of standing is always an issue. In other words, do the states have a right to block it, or should it be from Congress or someone else? Well, usually to get out of the standing issues, you join in with other parties to give you standing. In other words, the U.S. Congress or a congressman or something like that. But that's a legitimate issue as to whether or not standing. And this is how the Supreme Court can bypass the whole thing, by just kicking it back downstairs, saying,
I think Congress should work with the president. I do believe that Congress should be involved in some capacity, but
see, they may not have signed on to the original lawsuit, Steve, and that could create a standing issue and send this whole thing back.
Now, what about the companies that are private? Because part of the issue is around Mohela, which is the company that is a Missouri-based student loan company, and there is some question as to whether they should have been sued on their own, or whether they should join in with the states. And the states are conservative states: Arkansas, South Carolina, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. So there is some question as to whether that company, and there are other student loan companies in other parts of the world, definitely that are the question. As a matter of fact, Barrett said it would be hard to see how a win for the state would benefit Mohela, or a win for Mohela would benefit the state. If the assets are completely separate, you don't get any money out of it. And that's what she told the Nebraska Solicitor General, James Campbell, who's represented the state. If the state wanted money from Mohela right now, does the state have the authority to do that? That is what Barrett said.
Yeah, I mean, but like I said, that's a legitimate issue. We'll see where it goes.
I got to for a question for Nick and Steve. Why is the federal government in the business of student loans to begin with? Where's that in the Constitution?
It doesn't. It may not. There's a lot of stuff that's not in the Constitution. Just because it's not in the Constitution doesn't mean the government. If you look at the administrative agencies, like your friends at the IRS, they issue rulings all the time. I have to fight them off. They're like a bad disease. And it was never passed by Congress. But what Congress does is they say, well, we give administrative authority for the Internal Revenue Service to write the rules. Bingo, there they go. Now they have the authority. I think
clearly the logic then, why do we have Congress anymore?
That's a good question. I don't think they're doing their job, which, like I said, the number one job of Congress should be national security. And then number 2, it should be taking care of the economy of the United States of America. But they tend to get involved in all sorts of stuff that perhaps they shouldn't be involved in, which I think one of our commentators pointed out the other day when they read about how great the University of Georgia Law School is into the congressional record. We don't need that garbage going on in Washington, D.C. I'm glad the commentator pointed that out, on our show that they waste a lot of time there, not directing their efforts to serious economic issues such as Social Security going broke next decade, Medicare going broke this decade, and frankly, the U.S. economy is broke today. Remember, this $500 billion that Biden proposes to just disappear. You know who pays for all that? We do, with interest and borrowed money. And frankly, I don't think the American taxpayer wants to pay for somebody who wants to have a good time going to college. It's and a college that they probably shouldn't have gone to anyway. So,
I agree with you.
there's so many different alternatives in terms of going to university and getting an education that you don't have to go to a private school and spend bucko monies if you can't afford it.
Well, the tuition shouldn't be this high, and
All the
students
money
are-
and expect everybody else to pay for it. It's just like this thing that happened with who's this guy? Kobe Bryant's wife. All right. To me, it was an abomination. She is super rich. She's worth $400 million. You know what she did? She sued the city of Los Angeles and got a judgment for $28 million because they showed photos, and they probably shouldn't have done it. Photos of the dead bodies of her husband and her child. Okay, so that's wrong. Okay, but what also is wrong is she's got a judgment of $28 million against the people of the city of Los Angeles. What they should do, and the city of Los Angeles doesn't have the gall to do it, is to create a special tax for every citizen of Los Angeles County to put in $3 each into this special tax to pay Kobe Bryant's wife, who's worth $400 million. And now the reason I object to it more than anything is she doesn't need the money. She's worth $400 million. Hello. Why are we taxing the poor, Miss Bryant? Well, maybe
Nick, I think it's dangerous if we be based on a person's wealth. They either get justice or they don't. Justice should be blind based on the plaintiff.
But it isn't. Okay. I mean, the thing is, I don't know what world you live in. Justice is not blind. It is. There is a lot of economics based on justice. And the thing is, she does not need the $30 million, $30 million she's sucking out of the homeless people and the poor people of Los Angeles County. Okay, on a uniform basis.
Why is she going to the county and not these people as individuals?
Well, she sued the county because the county has money. Okay, the individuals
do it.
have
My
money.
point is, the county didn't do anything. People did.
There were firefighters. Okay, and by the way, the media never speaks up against this. There were firefighters. They took pictures. They probably shouldn't have done it. I agree with all that stuff. But Lee, $30 million is a lot of jack in my book. A lot of money. Okay.
Well, it's a lot of
and
money.
what they're doing is every citizen of Los Angeles County, every homeless person, every Latino, everybody is contributing $3 to Kobe Bryant's wife. So what they need to do is to create a special fund and make sure that all the taxpayers put in that $3 each and see how well they like doing it. Now, granted, $3 isn't very much, but there's a lot.
I think it's the least they could do.
Yeah.
It's the least they can do.
Steve,
So
That's the least they can do.
but we're going to come back to this issue. We're going to come back to this issue. But
I think it was outrageous, and no one ever says it's outrageous on media. Oh yeah, Kobe Bryant's wife's entitled to an extra $30.
It's outrageous that they took pictures and sold them to the press. That's what's outrageous.
Yeah, that's my point. They should be as individual sued, not the city. City
Yeah,
didn't
but
do
the
anything.
thing is, they sue the city because the firemen were working for the city. Okay.
Well, the city
doctrine
can
of-
get the
doctrine of vicarious liability, the doctrine
right?
of respondent superior. They sued the city of Los
They went out
Angeles, the county of Los
On this
Angeles. Okay. And it would be different if she goes, oh, great, I'm going to get the 30 million. Now if she says, I'm going to get the 30 million, I'm going to donate it to building more houses for the 500,000 homeless people in the county, I'd have a lot of respect for that. If I'm going to do it because I'm going to build a big, gigantic house in Bel Air, which, by the way, a lot of rich people, that's what they do with the money, then I have no respect for it. So I would love to hear for what she's going to do with the money she just sucked out of Los Angeles County. $30 million.
Getting back to the student loans, Steve, is the 10th Amendment meaningless?
It's all 10th Amendment meaningless? Steve,
Meaningless.
he addressed the question to you.
I don't know.
Pretty much.
And we got a new guest.
Well, at least we have the guest has a chair. Maybe it's a ghost guest. We haven't had one of those.
The ghost guest.
No. It didn't click.
Hey, Alvin.
Hey,
There we go.
How
No,
y'all
I'm glad to
doing?
be in. I actually had
Mr.
sent Alvin to
Alvin.
the wrong link and everything that happens in the
Oh,
world.
you're
of
welcome,
podcasting
Alvin
and
Johnson,
all
our
of that.
guest.
But actually, Nick,
Now, Steve, you
brought
can
up
dodge
an
the
interesting
question.
part and everything because you brought up housing, and Alvin is a gentleman that I met in Clubhouse as well as a number of other places, and he is definitely working in the space of housing and trying to get more of us to get housing because we are in the middle of a housing crisis that some people have recognized here in the United States and around the globe. But I'll let Alvin talk about what he's doing. I heard you earlier, Nick, mention about some of the politicians that are getting into housing, but Alvin actually has a long history in real estate. I think about a 35-year history, if I remember correctly, and all in that space. So Alvin, if you'll share a little bit about your real estate background and also what you're doing to get us out of this homeless crisis. And I'm sure that our guests have some questions as well, but I do know that when I've heard you talk about what you're doing, it seems truly amazing. So I would love to hear your take on the homeless situation, because as I've said on a couple of shows, I am shocked when I see tent cities in a city like Durham, North Carolina, because there's one actually near downtown, and there's some in Virginia, DC, California, including some that are near affluent areas like Burbank and Hollywood and stuff like that. So I just love to hear your perspective around homelessness and what you're doing.
Mark, thank you for the opportunity, man, and I'm glad to be here with these other esteemed guests that you have. My name's Alvin Johnson, and yeah, so this is 2023. I think my real estate career started in 1982, so 41 years. But I was cutting grass back then, and then I was painting houses and little stuff like that. But from a paint contractor, from learning how to paint houses to a paint contractor to a general contractor, to owning a mortgage company for 10, 12 years. And, I make it sound like, it's just a natural progression, but it wasn't that easy. And today I'm president and CEO of a 501c3 Hope Housing Foundation that is focused on providing safe, decent, sanitary housing to the economically challenged and workforce communities of America. And so, man, we've gotten up to, I guess, in the last 10, 12 years. I've been the president here since 11. We started with the mission of, the organization is 22 years old. It was a support organization for another 501c3 that has 16,000 units. After my career in the mortgage business, I stepped out in 2007, right at the beginning of 2008, when a lot of people went out. And I went to volunteer for a guy that has those 16,000 units. And it opened my mind to the world of apartments, apartment investing, partnerships, general and limited partnerships. I didn't know how any of that worked prior to then. So I sat around and devoured partnership agreements for about a year, 13 months, just reading and talking to all the property managers, talking to the maintenance guys at 66 properties across 9 states. That was the 16,000 units. We had 180 companies that owned these apartments, with limited partnerships and different entities and different seats. And I learned how to navigate a maze of companies that way, because when my friend, I said 13 months to the day, I met with him in his office and started volunteering. He died in a car wreck. And so 2 weeks after he died, the board asked me to step in and be the president of this today, what will be a $2 billion plus company that I started as a volunteer after having just all the experience that I just told you about. And so we wrote bankruptcy plan to try to preserve this thing. And that was a creditor that wanted the money, and they got what they wanted, and the trustee got appointed. So all these properties went away for literally pennies on the dollar in 2009 and 10 and 11. Well, when I got fired, because once a bankruptcy plan is in place, the president is no longer needed. This organization, Hope Housing Foundation, was a support organization of that company, and the board asked me to step in and take over. And so that board allowed me to step in and take over, and they reconstituted a board, and we were going to go off and change the world buying apartments one at a time. I didn't have any money, no credit, no experience at syndicating deals like that, but I just had a passion and a desire, and I knew that for what we were buying what we had the potential to buy these things for, that we couldn't build them at that time. And so we went on to grow, and we got up to about 3,500 units. Today we've got 1,054 units that we still own. We're in the process of starting 1,000 units this year, new construction. I got to a place where we could not afford to pay what sellers were wanting, where it made economical sense to pay $150,000 a unit when I can go build something for $190,000 a door with no maintenance issues. So 4 years ago, I went to what I knew and said, hey, how can we make this happen? We started looking for partners that wanted to come alongside of us to help build 20,000 units. That's our mission right now, 20,000 units in 5 years, beginning with this year. And we're doing that with some panelized systems, panelized products, structurally insulated panels. And super excited about that. It's not about the units, but it's about the system that will generate these really, really near net zero, super strong, energy efficient housing. Really, really nice. And I'll tell you real quick, and then I'll let you guys ask me anything you want. I've been, in this space of affordable housing since 2008 when I went to volunteer for my friend. And then I've been in this seat, president, 12, 13 years. And I really had a problem talking about affordable housing, because when you tell people you do affordable housing, all their nose kind of looks up at you and like, oh, you're one of those guys and you serve those people and that kind of stuff. And so I had a problem with that, man. And so last 6 months or so, I'm going to share this. I said, God, man, I've hit a wall. I don't know what to do. And something that just popped up on the inside of me said that my niches, the riches are in the niches, and my niches were tied to my mission. So I needed to get back to my mission. And I said when I started this that I would do this work for free because I really loved it. And something happened along the way. Well, I met this lady, man, about 2 months ago who told me that, man, there's this really nice neighborhood in Frisco, Texas, Stonebriar. They've got houses in there from 3,000 square feet to 20,000. They started $1 million and go up to $25 million. And I just can't believe they build these apartments across the street from there for those people. And I said, oh, really? What people? Tell me about those people. And she said, those people, man, they're low income. And I just can't believe they put that right across the street from that neighborhood. And I said, well, let me tell you about those people, because those are the people that we serve. And I said, affordable housing is like this. The area you're talking about, the area median income is $125,000 a year. And that means we serve a population of people that make between 60% and 80%. So $65,000 to $100,000 a year is our population in that market. So those people actually make $65,000 to $100,000. That is not poverty. And she started crying like I had hit her in the face. I mean, boo-hoo crying. And I said, why are you crying? She said, well, I used to live in that neighborhood and I got a divorce and my husband threw me out. And the only place me and my daughter could move to was an extended stay. Okay, whatever. Why are you crying? Well, right after I moved out of the extended stay, the only place I could move was next door to those apartments. There were some really nice townhomes. But the lady at that moment told me that the only reason I could live there was because I didn't make over $100,000. And just now, when you explained to me about those people, I realized that I became one of those people.
Wow. No, and affordable housing is a big issue. As a city official, this is the biggest issue in North Carolina with just the housing prices so high. But it's very hard for cities to identify in their policies how much to allocate for affordable housing. Do they buy land and bank it for affordable housing? It takes money to do this. Developers usually don't want to do this. So what is your opinion about in local communities? Cities like Durham are making efforts, and Raleigh in North Carolina, some of the suburbs are as well, but it's not as easy of an issue to just have affordable housing, right?
Steve, that's a really great question. And I'll tell you, and I'm balancing this deal right now up in Wisconsin. We're doing 185 units in a little city called Kaukauna, Wisconsin, 15 minutes from Green Bay. The area median income there is about $75,000 a year. The city stepped up and said, here's $4.5 million in TIF dollars to help develop this neighborhood. That's a substantial investment. That's about 10% of the capital stack to do that. So they were willing to defer whatever they did to give us those TIF dollars in an effort to bring people to the city because they don't have any housing there. So our tax dollars now, as a developer, I had to do the math. As a nonprofit developer doing good while doing good, I had to do the math and say, was this 10% equity on the front end worth it to help us close the gap on closing this? Or would it have been more beneficial to help our NOI go up to where we would not have received the TIF dollars, but we get 100% tax abatement? So, of course, nobody wants to hear that nobody wants to pay taxes, but if this $50 million development doesn't pay you $1 million a year in taxes, but it brings 200 people to the area that make $70,000 a year or $50,000 a year that are going to spend dollars in grocery stores and gas stations and everything in that market, it's a really good trade-off for the city. And some people have a short stick and don't see that sometimes. I mean, this development space for developers is really, really risky to go out there and put this kind of money on the line and hope they come when we build it. But if we had participation from more city officials like Akana stepped up and did, that would be absolutely amazing to close the gap. And then that $4.5 million allowed us, because it big piece of the capital stack, to bring our rents down to where 50%, no, I'm sorry. That particular deal, we've got 25% units at market. So we're following the safe harbor rule because we are using tax exempt bonds to finance this. So that's another real great caveat. But we've got 25% of the units at market. 55% of the units are at 80% AMI, and I believe the other 25% are at 50. So we're really closing that affordable gap that way.
Quick question for you, Alvin, and everything. We had Sharon on the show yesterday, and she actually had on her show, and she had a guest on that was working with the Fayetteville PAC. Fayetteville PAC is a PAC that is in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and she was talking about homelessness and the American Rescue Plan, which is one of the Biden initiatives to make sure that governments are getting certain amounts of money, but that they are using the money efficiently and wisely. And that's what the plan is supposed to do. But she also brought up the nature of what you've been alluding to, homelessness. And apparently, if you are traveling in a car and, going from place to place in the car and or a van, or even if you live in a tent, because I just mentioned the tent city, technically you are not counted as homelessness, which I did not know. But apparently in a lot of the statistics, because you have a vehicle and you have some sort of abode, because the car can be considered an abode, you are not considered homeless according to some of the government definitions, which I didn't know if you were aware of that, because that was shocking news to me and everything. But I was like, wait a minute, do you mean that if I don't drive, but if I have had friends that have driven, and some of them have lived in their vans and their cars, and technically they were not considered homeless because they were going place to place and had some place that they could lay their head. Now, I wouldn't call a car a home, but that was just something that was said, and I was just wondering if that was something you have run across, and also your thoughts around the American Rescue Plan.
Mark, I did not know that that's how you had to be considered homeless, is to not even have a car or a tent. I think that's pretty ridiculous that any government official that wrote that definition would think that way. I'm not familiar with the American Rescue Plan, but I can tell you that our organization's a 501c3. And when we started this, we were able to buy our first few properties in a way that allowed us to set aside 5 or 10% of our units for transitional housing for people that were homeless. I'll just tell you, almost as a tithe. And that was kind of my way of thinking about whatever you want to think about that. But it worked for that community. Because that community of Port Lavaca, Texas, we would find veterans living on the beach. And so my manager was a veteran, so she would literally go to the beach and take these guys out of a tent, or women and families. And she advocated for them with me to set these units aside for that. And what it allowed people to do was you can't get a driver's license without an address. You can't get an address without a driver's license. You can't get your Social Security benefits or veterans benefits or any of that without an address. So by her advocating for them to have an address, short-term, 3-month, 6-month transitional stay, it allowed them to get a address, then they could get their benefits, and then they can get everything they needed to move on. And so I think that if we are really focused on helping people in that way, there can be, and I know it takes money to do all this, but there can be a way that some of these tax dollars that we pay in property taxes, we pay in some of these states $3 per thousand. That's substantial tax dollars. Those things, if they were used efficiently or maybe not used and not charged to a nonprofit development organization like ours, we could actually provide those programs. It is not the government's responsibility to take care of the people. I believe it's the people's responsibility to take care of the people.
No, that makes a
You
lot of
start
sense.
putting you put more people in.
Really quickly, and I definitely want to hear from some of the others as well. Is that there's been a lot of concern around gentrification in communities and around minority economic development, and you are definitely a minority developer. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as to whether we're doing enough work in that space, because I know that there are some folks even in Durham that are in the minority community that have bought up some buildings, including some buildings in the downtown area. I don't think as many as some of the other communities, but definitely that does exist and everything. But I'm just wondering your take on the gentrification question, because I know here in Durham, we already lost Field Gardens, which was a project area. They wiped that down and put up some high rent type of apartments. And it's my understanding, because of some health issues, and I'm saying that those are legitimate health issues around asbestos and other things, that McDougal Terrace, which is a long-term public housing project, is about to go down and be wiped out, and all in that space. So just wondering your take on that, because we did see a period in the 60s and 70s that public housing was a big issue, and definitely there is Section 8 housing, including some even in the downtown area and everything. But a lot of people don't like that housing, don't like some of the elements that come with that housing. So whether it's here, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in Texas, where I believe you are, whether it's in a number of other states and everything, we do find that folks are tackling the public housing issue. And sometimes that creates a void, because sometimes these people are pushed out into the suburbs or into the country. That's if they can get out to the suburbs or the country. But I was just wondering your take on this, I would call it a public housing crisis.
Oh boy. Well, I believe
he's a journalism major, so you can expect questions like that.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to be very popular with this answer, especially around the Black community, because I don't consider myself to be a minority. I do not consider myself to be Black, even though I am. But I'm not a Black developer. I'm a developer that happens to have dark Black skin. I don't put myself in a Black box. I'm a man, and I just happen to have Black skin. Gentrification. Gentrification is sometimes necessary, because obviously if the people that were in that area did not have enough resources to take care of it, then that area can't take care of itself. Taxes, I mean, it just can't take care of itself. I understand. I think the government made a big problem with this public housing, and I think we've seen it in areas like Ferguson, Missouri, where they've torn down a lot of those old projects that were just slated for just poor people. You cannot put 500 economically challenged, broke people in one area and think it's going to be safe. You can't put all of those people in one area and think that that area is going to be great. It can't. There's no money there. There's no resources there. There's poverty there. There's all kind of issues there, because everybody is in a bad way. I think that we need to have a Secretary of Housing that has the balls to stand up and say, we're going to cut off all this Section 8 housing for able-bodied people. I'm on the front lines. I see people have parties when they get a Section 8 voucher, because guess what? They just got saved. They don't have to do anything for the rest of their life because they got that crutch. That is the biggest problem in the world, or in the United States, when it comes to this Section 8 housing. Ben Carson, somebody needs to do, whoever is the new Secretary of Housing. I thought Ben would have been a Black dude. I thought he would have had the balls to do it, but he's too smart. So again, that's I'm probably gonna lose some friends behind me.
No, that's
but
okay.
I feel that
we
way.
like people telling direct answers and how they feel about things. Now, my understanding, and then definitely I want to hear from Dan and others that have been waiting patiently, but you actually have, and you kind of alluded to it, a Horatio Alger kind of story. And I don't think that we hear enough of these type of stories, because as you mentioned, you were cutting grass and you were doing a lot of the labor work before you actually got to the point of being where you are now, that you can buy these kinds of properties. So I wonder if you could go into a little bit more details, because I did read a little bit about your history, and I do know that you were doing, if I can just use the term, if I'm going to use the military term, and though I've never served in the military, I do have cousins and relatives that have. You did the grunt work before you got to the kind of entrepreneurial work that you're doing now and everything. So if you could just share with our global audience a little bit about your journey, because I do think it is a journey that many people need to have a greater understanding of.
Thank you. Well, it sounds great today, but like I said, I started cutting grass and then learning how to paint houses. And when I paint houses, these were 10, 12, 15,000 square foot houses back in 1983 in Beaumont, Texas. And they put me in a closet that was as big as a house that most people live in, and make sure that when that closet is right. So I learned how to finish. And so from that, then this guy went out of business and I still needed to eat. So I started knocking on doors. And hey, I'd paint your house for $200 if you buy the paint. And I was really good at that. And there's a story behind that too, but I'll tell you. And so I knocked on one door, and the guy, James Gonzalez, Spanish guy, and Mike Jenkins, white guy, they were doing a hotel in Beaumont, Texas, the Ridgewood Hotel, that they were turning into a senior living facility, high-end senior living facility. And they knew I worked for this guy, asked me, could I be the paint contractor? So that changed my life. I went from being a grunt worker to a paint contractor, still working. And then I did that all the way through. I couldn't paint anymore in 86, 87, 88, because interest rates were so high, nobody was doing work. And so I, at that point, had a real, I think it was 1989. My son was 3 years old. I tried to kill myself, literally, and that didn't work. And I woke up 10 days later and said, boy, you're a loser. You couldn't even freaking kill yourself. Get your shit together. So from there, it took a few years for me to get back into the real estate space, but I did. And somewhere around 88, 89, 90, started, back into the real estate space. And then I think, and that was just being a remodel contractor in Beaumont, Texas. Then I moved to Deer Park in Houston, Texas, and I got into the mortgage business in about 1996. I got that way because I was running ads on the radio for my remodel company. And this guy called me and said, hey, man, I can get your clients mortgages. You don't have to wait for them to pay you. And I'm like, what? What's a mortgage? So then I got into that. He literally, from not knowing what a mortgage was to opening a mortgage company in 96. And I went, whoa, I can make more money this way. Because even as a painter, I wanted to franchise my business, but didn't know how to do that. I said, oh, as a mortgage broker, I can be really good and make a lot of money in a lot of different places. So I had a mortgage company with 20 or 30 loan officers, and just really just working because I didn't have a backup plan. And that's how I got into this space. And then I met my friend that allowed me to volunteer for him. And then that volunteerism turned into this. But there was one thing that somebody asked me on one of these podcasts was, what was the emotion behind the emotion that led me to knock on those doors? And that emotion that after many, many years of self-searching and trying to figure it out, that emotion was fear. I used to think I was operating out of faith, but I was actually operating out of fear, trying to outrun the problems that I thought would happen before they happened. So that's how I got into real estate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like I said, we'll turn over to the other panelists. But just really quickly, I did have a friend of mine that actually I ran into on the bus. I wish I could think of his name, but he's been doing something similar to you. He's actually doing the window cleaning for the downtown area and other areas here in Durham. I think he's been doing that for 30 years or something like that. So that is a career that a lot of folks don't think about. We were actually joking because he was like, he's going to leave the swinging part of the window cleaning to other more younger people, but he and one of his other competitors are still at that game. And I want to say that if I'm 60, he might be like around 65 or 70. So he is still doing the window cleaning here in North Carolina, even at that age. And that is actually his primary job from what I can tell and everything, but he is definitely making a living doing that. So definitely I have a lot of admiration for a lot of folks in the construction space. Also having a friend of my mom's that was one of the leading African-American construction developers before he passed away, that being Ron Roadfox, who owned property. I think they're in Texas. I know he owned them in California and he owned them in a number of other places. And I want to say that his kids are running the company out of Atlanta, which is Roadfox Construction or Construction Control, I think is the name of the business, if I remember correctly, and all in that space. But I'm going to definitely turn it over to others to hear their questions, including Lee, because I know Lee's got some thoughts as well.
Yeah, I just want to say welcome to the podcast, Alvin. And this is not really a real estate point, but this is, thank you for coming from a motivational point. I love your story and the way you deliver it.
Man, thank you, Lee. I'm just the old guy trying to figure it out.
I mean, the car thing, Mark. Maybe the logic there was, trailers and RVs, and they just didn't know where to draw the line. That's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Alvin. When you were owning your mortgage company or painting company, did you work 40 hours a week or did you work 80 hours a week? How many hours did you put in when you owned your mortgage company and your painting contracting company?
Oh my God, I can't even imagine. But it wasn't 40.
So it was more than 40, right?
Oh yeah, it's probably closer to 100.
There we go. Thank you, counselor. Thank you.
Yeah. That's the
That's
way
what I was trying to explain to people. I said every person I know who's been successful works like 80 to 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
But no one tells people that.
Well, my
that you
father's
put in
still
tons
alive.
of
He's
hours.
81. He came. My father came from India with only a couple dollars, and I've always been a really hard worker, probably the hardest worker of his kids. Even when as a young kid, I would remember that I would start my day at 4 a.m. going to tennis practice. I had to be on the court by 5 and then go back to school. And he basically said that and he was telling me this since I was 9 years old. He said, you go to work when it's dark and you come back when it's dark. And it's like 40 years later. And I literally work from 5 a.m. until 9 p.m. without stopping. And then I have a light dinner and I go to bed and I do it again. And it's just so ingrained in my DNA. But he's still alive. And now he gets mad at me when he sees me outside before it's dark. He goes, what are you doing? Get back to work. And he's 81 years old. And he goes, you're getting soft on me, man. You're getting soft on me. What are you going to, the guy, and it's funny, that's just the way he's driven. But I tell you, he's never, ever told me or any of his kids that they've done a good job. And he always says, when are you going to do something with your life? You don't work hard enough,
Well, Steve, I'll tell you, back in the day, your dad, that made us tough, but that also made us too tough.
Yeah.
That caused trauma for me.
Along those same lines, Alvin, what is your thoughts around, because I know that there is always a push for our athletes and our entertainers to get involved in business. I know that there's some athletes, including some in Texas. I know that Fran Harris is in the sports space, has been trying to work on some construction projects around sports training facilities, as well as her energy drink and a number of other things. But do you think that we are looking at the generational wealth aspect of business and construction and development? Because I do think that is something that even in our minority community, we're not seeing enough of. I think that other communities do a much better job of that than we do. But I was just wondering your take on how we can have the conversation around generational wealth and money that you can pass on. I don't have any kids, but I would love to have some things to pass on to my nephews. And if I was to be lucky enough to get together with a younger woman that could still have children, then that could be a possibility. But more than likely, it would be my nephews at the age of 60 and everything. But I was just wondering your take around generational wealth, because I'll just mention that the Road Fox company is an example of generational wealth, because it's actually run, and it's called Road Fox Construction Control Services, but it's run actually by the daughter now over there in Atlanta, and they do work in everything from construction management to project management to engineering, design services, and all in that space. And like I said, Mr. Road Fox was a very good friend of my mom and all in that space. So I definitely have some knowledge of that family and some of the amazing work that they are doing, not just here, but globally. And of course, they are an Atlanta-based construction company, and I don't know if you know them, but there are people that you might want to reach out to if you don't already know their work, Alvin.
I don't know them, but I've taken some notes and I'm gonna look that up. Generational wealth, that is a success story that you just told. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, those stories don't go like that. Most of the time, and this is just from my limited experience, right, or my limited exposure, but from what I've seen, a lot of times, a lot of kids that get left stuff like this, they don't want that junk that their parents did, because they saw Steve work from dark to dark. You think they want to do that? So no, they don't want to have nothing to do what took their dad away from them or their mom away from them. So most of the time, these companies get left and sold or dismantled or squandered, because the kids weren't raised in a way, there was not a healthy relationship with work established for the kids to want to take it over. generational wealth, I think if it's set up right, it's exactly what it should be. I have not seen a lot of examples of that used properly. Of course, we can look at what we believe to be, the Rothschilds and families like that I don't have any personal knowledge of. So we would think that that's how that works. I just don't have enough experience with that.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people talking about it, but a lot of the people that are talking about it, they probably need to learn how to make up their bed before they want to go change the world. So I don't know.
Well, speaking of people who want to change the world, I mean, you got folks like Chris Paul that apparently is trying to change the world, LeBron James that is trying to change the world, and others that are trying to change the world. And sometimes they're trying to do it in the business lanes. Like I said, Doc Rivers, I mentioned that before you got on here, is a schoolmate of mine. I won't call him a close personal friend, even though I would like to reconnect with him at some point and everything. But I do know that when he was in the NBA, he was also creating some businesses, including some in Atlanta. And I'm sure he's got business interests in both LA, where he used to be at, and in Philadelphia, where he is now, because he's one of those folks that actually, to Nick's point earlier, used that degree that he got and is actually doing well with it, both as an athlete, but also some of the things that he learned from that university in order to create some fairly lucrative business deals. And I definitely know that LeBron James has even been looking at some stuff, I want to say, in the housing space where he is originally from in Ohio, and definitely doing some outreach work. And I know that Chris Paul has been doing it in even our HBCUs, even though I don't think he attended an HBCU. And we've got 10 HBCUs right here in North Carolina and all in that space. But I just wanted your thoughts, as I mentioned earlier, around, are we seeing enough of the athletes and the entertainers giving true work to what they're doing, or is the LeBrons and the Chris Pauls the exception to the rule?
Those guys may be the exception just because they're at the real top of the food chain. There's a big divide between your average guy and a LeBron or a Chris Paul. There are a lot of athletes that are doing things in their hometown. Gary Gilliam is a great guy, man. Gary's got an amazing story. He played for the Seattle Seahawks. At 8 years old, his mom dropped him off at the Hershey School of Industrial School for Kids, right? And because she knew that would be better for him. 8 years old, dropped off on the playground, and she didn't come back for him. And they're best friends now, and she knew that was best for him. And after she got her life together, Gary didn't want to leave, but he went on to Penn State. He's doing some great things, and he's building an ecosystem just like Mr. Hershey did. Hershey didn't have any kids. So the town of Hershey, Pennsylvania, and all of Hershey chocolate bars go to feed this vision that he had to make the world a better place. And Gary's a product of that. And so he's doing a deal called the Bridge, because that's what the Hershey system in the school was for him, was a bridge from probably not going to be living to a bridge to ultra success, Super Bowl champion and all this stuff. And but I don't know that we hear enough of those stories, because the other side of that coin is you give a 19-year-old kid a whole bunch of money, 20-year-old kid a lot of money without guidance or the wrong guidance, and the average athlete's broke within 3 or 4 years after their real successful career. So I don't know that we hear enough of that, but the ones that we do hear surely are, like LeBron, surely are making a difference. Surely.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We just had, Damar Hamlin. It's horrible what happened to him, and a miraculous recovery. But because of that, his charity work became very public.
Yeah. It's well. Real quickly, we got away from some of the political issues we talked about, but this is just great to have you here. What advice do you have to? We often have debates on the show about what's going on with race relations, but you have a very inspiring story, and it seems like you've worked with what you had to deal with to get yourself into a level of life where you can really be a contributor. What advice do you have to people out there today that might be going through uncertain times, that might be experiencing, some racism, but how do they get motivated to look at the glass half full and look at opportunity?
Boy, that's a powerful question, and that may be very difficult from someone that's looking at it from a lens of half empty. But you literally have to make a decision.
You look you seem more conservative in your values and your beliefs, but you do it in such a dignified and respectful way. So I'm just curious, are you a Republican?
I am. I believe I vote more Republican and side more with those views because I'm not a victim. I could have been a victim, man. I was sexually assaulted at 9. If I would have hung on to that as a victim, I would have been Jeffrey Dahmer. I would have killed somebody. So you have to make a decision to not let that stuff bother you. I told you I tried to kill myself at my son was what 3 years old, so I would have been 24 years old. I had gone to ultra highs in my career, didn't even know it was a career. Had been a millionaire at 22 and then broke at 24 because I didn't know anything about money. I thought old people were dumb and how do I have all this money and they're walking around here going to work every day like that? And then 3 years later, a fool and his money are quickly parted because I didn't know what to do with it. And
Hey, Alvin, I want to bring up something that Nick brings up oftentimes and everything. I was surprised he didn't bring it up this time, but one of the things that Nick oftentimes talks about, and I brought it up on other shows that I have hosted as well, is this notion that we need to have fiscal training, fiscal literacy in our school systems, and we don't talk about that in the media. We don't talk that in about a number of other places. I know that Nick earlier mentioned, and he's mentioned it several times, that Social Security is going to be broke within 5 to 10 years, and all in that lane and everything. But I was just wondering your take around the public school system, and is this something that we need to be teaching within the public school system? And like you said, you had the money, had a significant amount of money, and then you lost that money, and now you have rebuilt that money. But I think a lot of our kids, when they get the money, whether that's through athletics, whether that's through being a lottery winner, whether that's through hard work or whatever, they don't have a plan and know how to deal with the money that they've got. I mean, you're in the housing space, and I'll just leave it at this. And they say that you need to have, I think it's less than a third of your money going toward housing. And there are some people that are spending probably about 50 to 60% on their housing. So they're already heading toward broke if that's what they're spending on their rent. And we do know that rising rents are a real issue. But I was just wondering your concerns around fiscal literacy, and if that's something we need to be teaching folks, including maybe don't buy a house for, a mortgage for whatever the expensive amount is if you can't afford it and if you don't have the money to do it.
Well, there's a couple of different topics there, Mark, but I'll tell you the school system really should. I remember when I went to high school, they had home ec class. So they taught you how to cook or sew or do something. There was shop, there was automotive mechanics, there was all kind of trades that you could learn in school. They used to take the kids out from the shop class and they go build a house during the semester, right? And so there were a lot of kids that came out of school that knew they weren't going to college, that at least they knew how to balance a checkbook. At least they knew how to get up and cook eggs in the morning. Nowadays, you don't have any of that. And you've got so many parents, young parents having kids. Again, I see it because we own these apartments where we have a lot of recipients of Section 8 vouchers. We have a lot of those people there. And so, again, when they throw a party because they got a housing voucher, that's what they have been taught. They were not taught a trade. They were not taught. And my parents were school teachers, both of them. My dad's mom was a principal, and my mom's mom was a really high up executive in Avon. Notice I didn't mention any of the grandfathers. That's an issue. Where are they at? Where are we? Where are the men?
Yeah.
Yep. What do you say to folks? And then I know we got to get to Steve's closeout, and I don't know if Dan's got any thoughts because he usually has got some thoughts as well. But what do you say to those people that are concerned about the mortgage industry and the real estate industry? And they will point out that in both of those fields, there is what they consider structural racism, and whether that is real racism or not, it sounds like as a conservative, that is something that you are not always on that bandwagon with. But I'd just love to hear your take on this, and if that is something that we need to be concerned about, because there will be people that say that if you go to get a bank loan and if, say, Lee goes to get a bank loan, the answers may not be the same, but you have been highly successful. So I just wonder, do you think that structural racism is real, and is it something that we need to be aware of?
Mark, it might be real. I may have been turned down from some loans because I'm black. Maybe, and maybe not. But if I choose to see it from that lens, everything I see will be from that lens. One of my friends tells me, as we get better, it gets better. What is it? Everything that we look at. So if I look through a racial lens, I could see right now that I'm the darkest one on here. Why y'all got me on here?
I think it's a good point, and I'm going to go on a limb here. I often have healthy debate with Dan Worthington and Shaquille. I do believe that there's racism that exists, but I got to tell you, like in my personal experience, I've never been very conscious of my race in terms of just who I am, right? Now, I've experienced some racism in my past when I was a young kid, but I do believe the Indian American experience is different than the Black American experience. So I will say that, right? I mean, my parents came from India, but when they left, they came for a better life. But the history of the Black people, they came in on slave ships, right? So there was a stigma, and I think, you know, but the way I was raised in my household, I wasn't allowed to talk about race when you were a kid growing up in my father's house, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, I get very uncomfortable when I go to these diversity and inclusion seminars because I've been taught my whole life, don't talk about that. So it's really, really odd for me being a Democrat, right? I mean, I just,
Well, that's your choice, Steve. You're a Democrat because you choose to be a Democrat.
you can be a moderate.
I can't help you with that.
But you can be a Democrat and be more moderate. You don't have to be a completely liberal Democrat, right?
Steve,
No, I don't know anymore.
racism still exists. Individuals are still racist, but the system itself is not. There is no
Right.
Jim Crow anymore, where it was the institutions before. It's just individuals making horrible decisions, hateful decisions, not institutions.
But Lee, I can't say that because, like I mentioned earlier, there is still redlining. There is still things that go on in the real
Mark, when
estate
you say
space. There are still
redlining,
things that go on in the banking.
Mark, when you say redlining, do banks have official policy not to give to blacks?
I think that there are some banks that have those policies. I think that there are some banks that
That's
still have
official
those
bank
policies.
policy?
Yes, it's an unwritten policy, but I think that the unwritten policy can be just as effective as.
I like Alvin's attitude. Alvin's attitude is don't make yourself a victim.
Good attitude.
You know, be a man. Take responsibility for your life. Make your decisions. Take the opportunities that are given to you, and go and run with them. You know, make goals. You know, achieve them. Be responsible for your family.
That gives me a great way to close out. And I'm going to start a little early before we go to.
No, it's almost that time and everything. I did want to hear Alvin's because he was our guest of honor, answer to that and everything, and any other thoughts that he had before we get to your closeout and all that, because closeout is very much an important part of the show. But like I said, I just know some folks that have been victimized, whether that's on the police and everything else. And I hear what y'all are saying about the fact that you have to not let that be the victim mentality and all of that. At the same time, there are things that are unfair. I mean, I come from, as Nick well pointed out, I come from the world of journalism, and there was a time frame, and there are still some newsrooms that are still very lily white, including in their management and everything. And yes, I do have an issue with that, particularly if they're in towns that have a decent minority population. I mean, if you're in a town that it is predominantly white area, and you don't need to just import black reporters just to be that diversity element. I wouldn't say that at all, but definitely if you are representing a town like, say, Detroit or some of those other towns, and you don't have somebody in your newsroom to address those issues, then yes, I have a problem with that. And I do think that even happens in this modern day times as well. But Alvin, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, and then we get to Steve's closeout. We can go maybe a minute or two over, but then I'm glad that you're here and hope that you'll come back on some other shows as well, because we do like to have different perspectives.
Oh, I'd love to come back. Anytime you invite me, I'll be back. I'm sure that racism exists. I think we're all a little racist. If there's some people I don't like, I won't say because of their skin color or any of that. It's just, I just might not like you, or I may not a dislike. It's just, I don't know you. And maybe my unknowing creates a little discomfort. I'm not going to say that racism doesn't exist. I personally have nobody's told me that this happened to you because you're black. That's all I'm saying. So I'm not being insensitive to people that have truly experienced it. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, right next door to Vidor and Jasper. They drugged James Byrd from the back of a pickup truck in the 90s or 2000s. You know what I mean? So, and some of my closest friends lived across the bridge where they told me don't go after dark, and I went anyway. So I just hadn't experienced it. Maybe I've been very fortunate, but I could see it from a racial lens. I just choose not to. That's all.
No, that makes sense. I'm getting ready to toss it to Steve, like I said, but the other conversation that we've had, and I've even brought it up to Dan, is there is also an elitist lens as well, because that's something I know a lot of people are also concerned about. So there is definitely, because one of the arguments that I've heard even to the Indian community is that a lot of the people that come over that are successful from India are from the elite of India. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts around that, because there is definitely an elitist lens as well, because a lot of the folks that are making it from the other countries, because we will get pointed out to the Indians, we'll get pointed out to the Nigerians, we'll get pointed out to a number of others, but they're not exactly the common folks that are coming over. There are a lot of times the elite that are being successful.
Well, my father wasn't the elite, but my mother was. But what I will tell you before I go to close out is that many of the Indians that have come into America are the highest educated. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at the top 1/2 of 1%. There are Indian engineers coming, just to give you a perspective. There are Indians I know that live in Morrisville that went to the Indian Institute of Technology, which is the hardest university to get in. They have them in the major cities. They apply to MIT for their backup. There's a guy living in Morrisville. He said Georgia Tech engineering was like what he did in 8th grade.
Wow.
Okay. So these are the people coming into America from India. I mean, he was like, Duke Business School. He goes, I did that math in 6th grade in India. 7th grade. I mean, he goes, he got straight A's in business school, never studied, did not study for one exam, and graduated #1 in his class. So
why aren't our schools producing that?
Well, part of it is that.
Well, it's about being smart, Lee, and
well,
some
no,
of
a lot
our
of
kids
it's
are just
not.
stupid, right?
But they start at a very young age, and then there's just a very intense. Now, you give up freedom of thought, though. So I will say this for the United States of America. The greatest part of America is we're thought to think freely and independently. Our universities are good sometimes, even liberal arts, because you learn how to think for yourself. That's why we've been a nation of entrepreneurs. India hasn't been like that. Now it's changing, right? But you can't have a calculator. So that's why it's great. Like one of my colleagues, Satish Garamella, if I tell him we're doing the budget, and he'll say 554 times 375, and he'll close his eyes for a minute, and he'll come out to the number, to the actual decimal point. I'm like, how do you do that? And he goes, there are no calculators when I was going on, man. Everything's got a formula, right? So it's the mind brain. But anyway, we got to close out.
Yep, you'll go to the closeout. So I'm glad that Alvin was here, and glad that he'll be making some return trip.
Alvin, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. And as I get ready to watch the Creed movie on Friday, we can't think of Rocky Balboa when he was telling his son that great motivational speech in the movie Rocky Balboa, which was after Rocky V, but that was the one where he tried to come out in retirement and fight a champion. Mm-hmm. And he told his son, it's not about how hard you get knocked down. It's how hard you get knocked down and get how many hits you can take and keep moving forward. And he said it's not about pointing the finger. It's about taking those hits and being able to take those hits, because that's what living is. And I think that's the most important thing we got out of your talk today, is that you've taken some hits, but you've learned and you've clawed your way back into life every single experience you've had. And so that's my motivation for everyone out there listening today. Things might not be going the way you want them, but you have another day tomorrow. So try to find something positive that you can hold on to so that you can move forward. And I remember John Chambers' father, who was the former CEO of Cisco. John often tells the story about how when he was fishing, he almost drowned in the New River Gorge in West Virginia. And his father kept telling him to grab the rod. And one day he asked his dad, as he was driving back, Dad, why did you ask me to grab the rod? He goes, son, if I didn't tell you to grab the rod, you would have drowned, because you would have focused on drowning. So that's my metaphor of the day. Grab the rod so you can focus on that.
That's
and
a great
stayed
metaphor.
with John Chambers his entire life, a dyslexic who would go on to run a company, 47 billion, 7 million to 47 billion, acquired 180 companies, and was one of the leaders of the networking computing revolution, along with Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, and many of the other greats. So that's my inspiration of the day. I hope I motivated you on World Edition.
Hey, I know that's it, and I know.
And Steve, one more thing. You too can choose to be a Republican.
Well, I don't know if
Dan, just really quickly, and I think Alvin will enjoy this, and I'm just going to throw this out and everything. I don't think I'm speaking out of school because it's a known fact. My mom, who I know that Steve is aware of and is retired, actually ran for Secretary of State under the Democratic Party and is actually considered a proud Democrat and all in that space. The reason I know who Ron Roadfox is because that was for a number of years my mom's significant other, and he is definitely a diehard Republican. So you can have Republicans and Democrats living in the same space and being
sure, yeah,
all in that way.
Just don't talk about politics.
Well, folks, it's that time. I want to thank you all for being with us today. We got to go. It's 4 minutes over.
See you all tomorrow. God bless.
Yep,
Be back next week tomorrow for another edition, and Friday. It's been a great week. Alvin, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, guys.
Be safe wherever you are. Get up, keep moving forward. Thank you, folks.
Sounds good. Let's get on out of here.